Welcome into Boxing Scene Today here at the Pro Box TV studios. Well, what a difference a couple of days makes. A couple days ago, we were talking about Erickson Lubin not coming to terms with Bakhram Murtazaliev for a title shot, an opportunity he earned right here on Pro Box TV. The rumor was Vergil Ortiz. Well, looks like it's official. Early November, possibly the 8th on DAZN, Vergil Ortiz versus Erickson Lubin. What does this choice mean? And now that we know about the fight, what are the tactics? Well, I have the perfect people to help me break it down. In studio, Paulie Malignaggi. Via Zoom, we have the other champ, Chris Algieri, and coach Robert Garcia, of course, an insider when it comes to Vergil Ortiz knowledge. But Paulie, let's talk first about the financials here. The decision, instead of taking on Murtazaliev, who you call him the boogeyman of the division, but a more lucrative fight against Vergil Ortiz. Talk about the decision for Erickson Lubin.
Well, there's notoriety, right? At this point, you got to balance things out. Obviously, finances make a difference, especially the later you get in your career. Lubin is not a spring chicken. You know, he's not old, but he's not a spring chicken. So his finances certainly take a lot more precedence as you get older and you come close to the end of your career. So I think that makes a big difference. Murtazaliev is an excellent, excellent fighter, but unfortunately, because he doesn't get a lot of notoriety and he hasn't been pushed, and you know, shame on whoever has him signed. I don't even know who has him signed, but they should be ashamed of themselves. Nobody knows him, and you know, except the insiders. And the insiders know how dangerous he is. So who's going to take a chance on a dangerous guy that you can't get paid for and you can't get credibility for? So you move on and you say, okay, if I'm going to take, I guess from the Erickson Lubin perspective, he's saying, if I'm going to take a big chance here, you know, okay, I may not have a championship, but Vergil Ortiz is obviously taking a big risk. He's one of the hottest prospects in the sport. Let me say, I say contender. I wouldn't even call him a prospect at this point. One of the hottest contenders in the sport, especially in the West, rising star. But at least I'm going to get credit for it if I fight him. You know, win or lose. You know, the calculated risk starts to matter more, and I think that's the reason for the Lubin fight. It's a more recognizable name as far as opposition is concerned for Lubin to fight, and obviously, for me, my opinion is just as big a risk. My opinion, for me, the three most dangerous guys at 154, which is a weight class that I saw a ton of dangerous guys.
Yeah, we could pick 10.
But the three most dangerous guys for me are Murtazaliev, Bohachuk, and Ortiz in no particular order. You know, like those three for me are probably the three best. And then there's some other very good fighters like Fundora and so on and so forth. But I think those three are the absolute monsters of the weight class. So you're just trading one monster for another monster, but it's a more known monster.
So what's your thought, Chris, on this idea of passing over Murtazaliev, taking on Vergil Ortiz? Very, very dangerous. People don't know. We ran into him in Fresno. First thing I thought is, man, he is absolutely gigantic for 154 pounds. Talk about the risk. Big risk for Lubin in terms of great opposition, like Paulie said.
Yeah, we touched on this on the last show. We spoke about, you know, when you have that kind of crossroads as a fighter, it's like, all right, do I take the lesser money, lesser profile for a chance to be a world champion because he's fighting for Murtazaliev's title, or do you take the bigger profile fight with the bigger paycheck attached where you fight a guy like Ortiz? So obviously we got our answer. He went to the bigger profile route, which I don't blame. Like the champ, you said, he's not a spring chicken, even though he's only 29. It's because he's been around for so long. It's crazy to me to think that Erickson Lubin's only 29 years old when he was fighting Charlo. How many years ago was that now? 6, 7 years ago at this point, maybe even longer. But if you still look at Erickson Lubin, he still has a really good record. His only 2 losses are to Charlo and to Fundora, and Fundora is the current unified champion. And I believe his last 4 fights, the records are 75, 3, and 2. So not been in easy has Erickson Lubin pretty much for a vast majority of his, especially his second half of his career. But once again, he's facing one of the toughest guys in the division. If you think about it, his losses to Charlo, lost to Fundora, and now he's fighting Victor Ortiz. He has a win over Ramos Jr., which is a big win, another undefeated guy who had a lot of potential behind him. He stopped Vergil Holmes in his last fight, who was another undefeated guy, taking O's along the way. So, you know, at this point, even though Erickson Lubin hasn't been as busy as you would like, he has been on a good run. But Ortiz is a whole nother thing, man. Like you said, Jimmy, we saw him in Fresno. He is a big 54-pounder, and Robert, you know better than anybody. You've been telling me about this kid for literally 6-7 years now, about how talented he is, where his potential can be. But all in all, it's a fun fight. I'm not mad about this matchup at all.
So what's your thought? We have the coach right here, Robert Garcia of Vergil Ortiz. What are your thoughts on Erickson Lubin as an opponent? It's a weird mix. He's a very talented fighter. As Chris says, hasn't been that busy, but isn't that old. What's your thought about the preparation for this fight?
Well, look, the fight, definitely going to be a challenge for us, for Virgil. Virgil definitely wants to fight everybody in the division, and he wants to fight the best. Our first choice was title fight against kid from Puerto Rico that just won, Sandro Sayas. But obviously, that he's young, he's top rank, and his team are doing something different with him that I don't blame them either. But Erickson was a good name, good fighter that some people might think, oh, he's not in that level anymore. He already had his time has already passed. But like you guys are saying, he's only 29 and he lost to two great fighters also. So he's gonna be a great challenge. We're gonna have to be very well prepared. Hopefully there's no injuries, no nothing for both camps, and we put up a great fight.
Well, when you look at it, Paulie, we were there talking about the Ardrell Holmes fight. We were there. We called that fight. It was on our air. Slow start from Erickson Lubin. Kind of woke up a little bit late, but what do you want to see out of an Erickson Lubin taking on Vergil Ortiz that we didn't see against Ardrell Holmes? What adjustments have to be made? Because this is a big step up in talent.
Well, for one adjustment, we're seeing it already, and that's being more active. I think the part of the reason for the slow start Erickson had against Holmes was that he had a big layoff. Yeah. And sometimes when you're coming off a big layoff, you got to shake the ring rust off even in the first couple of rounds of the fight, So I think Erickson was certainly, shaking off some of that ring rust. But, that's one of the changes I'm glad I'm seeing here in making the Ortiz fight, or even if it was going to be the Murtaza fight, which now it is the Ortiz fight, but he's staying busy. So you would hope that now there's less ring rust to shake off, or there's no ring rust to shake off, and he can get off to a quick start against Vergil. Because with Vergil, you can't start off that slow like you did against Holmes. Otherwise, it might be an early night. You might be packing your bags and you might get knocked out. Lubin is a very good fighter. He's a slickster. He's got a lot of experience, but he's not as intense as a young phenom like Ortiz, especially at this point. Ortiz is that rising star where he's just consuming everything in front of him. It's that point in his career, and every hot prospect, hot contender goes through that when they're young. They're just in that seek and destroy type of mentality. And so you got to be on your P's and Q's early in fights against young guys like that. So that's one adjustment I like, is that he's staying busy now. He signed the fight not long after just getting the Holmes fight. Now I want to see if that ring rust is not there, because you need that to be a big change early in that fight.
Well, Chris, when you look at coming off the fight against Israel Madrimov, a little bit of a puzzle, right? Terrence Crawford had a tough fight with him, but Ortiz, a much wider win for him. What do you like coming off that fight from Vergil Ortiz? What would you like to see him build on?
Well, Madrimov is more than just a hard puzzle to solve. He's a really good fighter, and I think he gets looked over because he's coming off of losses to Crawford and now to Vergil. But I was really impressed with Vergil in that fight because I rate Madrimov very high, obviously. But that was a fantastic performance, and I think part of it was, you had some question marks about Vergil at 154 pounds. Up until that point, until he moved up to 154, he had a 100% knockout rating. He was 21-0 with 21 knockouts. And then he fought Bohachuk. Got dropped twice in that fight. Had to kind of pull it out of the fire there toward the end. Showed a lot of mettle, showed a lot of toughness, showed a lot of skill in that fight. But then you're like, all right, well, maybe this guy isn't the same guy at 54. And then you see him go right back in against Madrimov. And Madrimov is not an easy task. And he looked phenomenal that night. I was so impressed with him. His jab, his speed, his power, his ability to take control of the ring against a guy who's very difficult to deal with. So in terms of where Ortiz is at, I think he's righted the ship at 54. I think he's grown into the weight class properly. He understands these guys are bigger. They're going to be a little stronger. They're going to hit a little harder. And listen, Lubin can punch. He's one of those guys, man. He's got a lot of stoppages. And Champ, you mentioned him as being a slickster. I think he's pretty well rounded because a lot of times early on he was blowing guys out. And he's a good puncher. He hurt Fundora bad in their fight. He put him down. That was a war going back and forth. In the fight against Ramos Jr., he had to be slicker. He had to be more of a disruptor. And he was slowing down the pace and was able to squeak that one out, which I don't know if that's going to be the plan against Vergil, because once Vergil gets going, man, he's a momentum fighter. Once you get behind the eight ball with him, he doesn't really let you off the hook. So is Holmes going to go out there and keep a slow pace early on and try and box it and try and be slick? Or is he going to fight fire with fire the way he did against Fundora, in which case we're in for a hell of a fight? But either way, I mean, I think the versatility of Erickson Lubin is going to give you, coach, something to think about.
That's exactly what I was going to ask. How do you deal with that? As Chris says, the versatility of a guy, very talented, very experienced, and has a lot of tools in the toolkit. What's that training camp like?
Look, those are the challenges we like. Myself, my son, who's part of with Virgil's team. Obviously, Virgil Senior, his dad. We do together. Hector Beltran. We team up and we work together. We study. We do our own studying, but then we put it all together and we get to work. Virgil is prepared for anything at 154. He wants all the challenges. Obviously, different promoters, different TV networks and stuff like that might be the reason why a lot of those fights don't happen. But Virgil wants to fight everybody, and Erickson Lubin is our next guy, and we'll be ready for him. We're definitely going to be in great shape. He's already in camp. He's been training for a couple of weeks already, and we still got plenty of time left. So when the bell rings, you guys will see that Virgil is not just one of the best at that division, but probably the best. I truly believe that he's very smart in the ring, and he's fast, he's strong, he's dedicated like nobody else. So that's a big difference.
I see you smiling, Coach, talking about the talent of this guy. Paulie, go ahead.
Yeah, no, with me, people probably notice I have a lot of criticism for fighters who are top level fighters and who half-ass it, and Vergil is the antithesis of that. He's a young fighter who's shown not just that he wants all the smoke, but has gone after all the smoke. I mentioned the top three fighters, in my opinion, in this weight class in no particular order. It's Bochuk, Ortiz, and Murtazaliev. He fought one of them. You know what I mean? Ortiz fought Bochuk already. It was a great war. And after that, he went after Madrimov, like the champ Chris was talking about, and beat Madrimov, for me, more convincingly than Crawford did.
Wanted Zayas.
And then wanted Zayas, which for me is actually an easier fight than the two fights he just had. I think this one's an easier fight than the two fights he just had. And that's no disrespect to Lubin. Lubin's a good fighter. But, dude, he's been going for all the smoke and not just saying it. In a day where Western fighters are absolutely annoying to me, where they just talk and they're good fighters and they don't fight each other. This guy, I mean, honestly, Robert, you have an interesting stable in the West because it's almost like you have an Eastern mentality in the Western Hemisphere, because all your fighters go after all the smoke. Bam Rodriguez, Vergil Ortiz. You had, back in my generation, you had Maidana, who fought everybody. You know what I mean? You had, your stable is basically, it's almost like it doesn't belong in the West. Yeah, it's in the West, but it doesn't behave like all the other Western fighters.
Well, Paulie,
Coach, even your brother Mikey fought everybody in every weight class, and he would move up and fight the toughest guy in the division. He fought Errol Spence, moving up and being undersized and still willing to fight everybody. But yeah, as you know, Rob, I've been in your gym. I know how everybody is there. Champ, it's the atmosphere, it's the culture of the gym. Everybody wants all the smoke and they go for it.
And I'll tell you now something else. Guys like me and you, we didn't have a choice. We had to take the tough fights, otherwise there's no TV. Okay, Robert, Coach, you train fighters who are the main A side. They could fight the Uber drivers like some of these guys like to fight. We talk about Tank Davis and guys like that. They could choose to fight all the Uber drivers they want. They'll get a date because they're the monster A side, but they choose to fight other monsters instead. This is why guys like this are good for the sport and why the West needs boxers like this. You know what I'm saying? So, again, I like this matchup, but as much as I like it, it's actually an easier matchup for Ortiz on paper than his last two fights. This guy's been fighting at such a high level consistently, and he's still going after it constantly.
Guys, am I the only Californian here, Robert? That's Mexican American fighters. What you're saying is this Eastern European.
Yeah, the old school.
I grew up with that.
The old school,
Robert, am I wrong here? I see it as Mexican American fighters. They want all the smoke. They'll fight every week if you let them. You have to tone them down in the gym because they'll go to war every single time. Those are the gyms I grew up around in Southern California. Am I wrong, Robert?
Look, that's the way the gyms are in Southern California, especially my gym. With so much talent, so many world champions, so many fighters from 10, 15 years ago to now. Everybody sees the way the gym runs, and they're pretty much forced to say, I want to fight the best. I need to fight the best. They can't take the easy route because nobody else has done it. Nobody else does it, and it would just make them look bad. Everyone in my gym, that's what they're looking for: the bigger fight, the biggest fight out there. Like Paulie's saying, maybe Erickson Lubin is not the bigger name than the last two opponents we had, but he's decent, and that's what's available. We couldn't get a world title fight. We couldn't get the Sanders Sayas fight. So I think Lubin is the next up there, and he's there to give us a great fight, and he's gonna put up a great show. Also, we don't go out there trying to get the easiest opponent out there, because it's just not the way our system is. Our fighters are ready to fight the best and challenge themselves. That's what they want. They want the biggest challenges.
And one more name to add to that list. Brandon Rios, too. Always went after top fights. Always had the top fights as well.
Always 100%. That's why you're a great coach with a great team. Also got to mention, remember that team in Plant City, the Pro Box TV, the stable of which Erickson Lubin is a part. He's going to be ready as well. Looking forward to a great fight in November. Once again, Ortiz versus Lubin. And as more fights make news, you'll hear about it right here on Boxing Scene Today. Join us, find out why millions are watching.